I never thought I'd fire a gun again after Henry died. The weight of his old rifle felt wrong in my hands, that night too heavy, too cold, too full of memories I'd buried with him 6 years ago. But when I heard the glass shatter next door, when I saw shadows moving through Tom's cabin windows, something ancient woke up inside me. Something I thought had died along with my husband on that hospital bed, under those fluorescent lights that made everything look already dead. My name is Eleanor Bradford. I'm 72 years old, and I live alone at the end of Pinewood Road, where the forest meets the sky, and silence is the only neighbor most people want. Tom Mitchell lived in the cabin next to mine, a veteran, a widower, like me. We'd exchange waves across our porches, sometimes a jar of homemade jam or a loaf of bread, but never much more than that. Two broken people, respecting each other's carefully constructed walls. Two souls who understood that some kinds of loneliness are too sacred to disturb. I used to wonder if he was as empty as I was. If he also woke up reaching for someone who wasn't there anymore. If he also talked to ghosts in the kitchen while the coffee brewed. If he also questioned whether God had forgotten this little corner of the mountains, or if he'd just stopped caring altogether. That November night, the cold cut through everything. It was the kind of cold that makes your bones ache, that creeps into your house no matter how high you turn the thermostat. I was wrapped in Henry's old flannel robe, one that still smelled like him if I didn't wash it, which I never did, sitting in the armchair by the window with a cup of tea going cold in my hands. I was about to turn off the lamp and surrender to another sleepless night when I heard it. The crack of breaking glass, sharp as a gunshot against the stillness. My heart stopped. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe loneliness had finally driven me to hearing things that weren't there. But then I heard voices. Low, rough, urgent. Men's voices. 3, maybe 4, moving through Tom's cabin like wolves circling wounded prey. I pressed my face against the cold window, my breath fogging the glass. Across the narrow stretch of forest between our homes, I could see them shadows moving through Tom's windows, flashlights cutting through the darkness like blades. They were searching for something, tearing through his life with the casual violence of people who'd done this before. I should have called 911. That's what reasonable people do. That's what my daughter would tell me to do if she ever called anymore. But the nearest sheriff's station is 40 minutes away on these winding mountain roads, and something deep in my gut told me Tom didn't have 40 minutes. I'd seen his truck earlier that evening, parked crooked in the driveway like he'd barely made it home. I'd seen him stumble getting out, one hand pressed against his chest, his face gray as November rain. Pride kept him from knocking on my door. Pride kills men like him. My hands were shaking when I stood up. The teacup fell, spilling across the hardwood floor Henry had installed 30 years ago, back when we still believed we'd grow old together in this house. I didn't stop to clean it. I walked straight to Henry's study, the room I'd kept locked since the funeral, the room that still held his smell, his presence, his ghost. The gun cabinet stood in the corner like a monument to everything I'd lost. Henry had been a hunter, a teacher, a patient man who'd spent years showing me how to hold a rifle, how to breathe, how to respect the weight of taking aim. Ellie, he'd say, his voice soft as morning mist, a gun isn't about power, it's about responsibility. It's about protecting what matters when everything else fails. I hadn't touched that cabinet in 6 years, hadn't wanted to. The key still hung on the same nail beside the door, dusty and forgotten, covered in cobwebs. Like everything else, I'd abandoned after Henry's heart gave out in that hospital corridor, while I held his hand and begged God for a miracle that never came. Inside the cabinet, his hunting rifle waited like a relic from another life, our life. When he'd take me into these mountains at dawn, when his laugh would echo through the pines, when I still believed prayer was more than just talking to an empty sky. The rifle was a Winchester Model 70, the one his father had given him, the one he'd promised to pass down to our son if we'd ever had one. I lifted it out with trembling hands. It was heavier than I remembered. Or maybe I was just weaker now, older, more hollow. I found the ammunition in the drawer below. Henry had always kept everything organized, labeled, safe. Even in death, he was still taking care of me. Loading that rifle felt like resurrection. Each bullet sliding into place was a memory clicking back to life. Henry's hands over mine, guiding my aim, his breath warm against my ear. His pride when I finally hit the target. His love, solid and real and gone forever. I hadn't prayed in 6 years. Not since I knelt beside Henry's hospital bed and begged God to save him. Not since I screamed at the ceiling of an empty church and got nothing back but silence. Not since I decided that if God existed, he was either cruel or indifferent, and neither option deserved my faith. But standing there in that study, with Henry's rifle in my hands and a stranger's life hanging in the balance across the darkness, I heard myself whisper words I didn't plan, words that came from somewhere deeper than choice. If you're still there, if you ever cared about any of us, don't let me be too late. Please, not again. The November wind answered with silence, just like always. I walked to the front door and stepped out onto my porch, barefoot, wearing nothing but my nightgown and Henry's old hunting jacket that swallowed me whole. The cold bit into my skin like teeth. The rifle felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Across the darkness, maybe 60 yards away, I could see them clearly now. 3 men, shadows with shape, ransacking Tom's home with methodical violence. And then I saw him, Tom, on the floor, not moving. One of the men kicked him, just kicked him, casual and cruel, like he was checking if a dog was dead. That's when everything my husband ever taught me came flooding back. Muscle memory, love memory, survival memory. Breathe, steady your hands, aim high, don't think, just act. Protect what matters when everything else fails. I raised the rifle, pressed it against my shoulder the way Henry had shown me 1,000 times. Felt his ghost standing behind me, his hands steadying mine. And I fired one shot into the air. The sound split the night like judgment itself. The echo of that gunshot rolled through the mountains like thunder, bouncing off the pines and coming back to me again and again, as if the earth itself was then aching awake from a long sleep. For a moment, everything froze. The shadows in Tom's cabin stopped moving. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then chaos erupted. The 3 men burst through Tom's front door like rats fleeing a sinking ship, stumbling over each other in their panic. I could see their faces now, young, maybe mid-30s, hard faces that had seen too much and cared too little. One of them was carrying a pillowcase stuffed with what I assumed was Tom's life savings. Another had a laptop clutched under his arm. The third was empty-handed but moved like a predator, his eyes scanning the darkness, searching for the source of that shot. He found me. Our eyes locked across the distance, across the cold November night, and I saw something flicker in his face. Surprise, maybe, confusion. Here I was, an old woman in a nightgown, barefoot on a porch, holding a rifle that was almost as tall as I was. I must have looked like a ghost, or a grandmother who'd finally lost her mind. Get off his property, I heard myself say, and my voice came out stronger than I felt, carried on the same wind that had carried Henry's voice through these mountains when he was alive. Get out of here before I put the next one through something that bleeds. I don't know where those words came from. I'd never threatened another human being in my entire life. I'd taught Sunday school for 20 years before Henry died. I'd baked cookies for every church fundraiser, volunteered at the Veterans Hospital, donated to every charity that knocked on my door. Violence wasn't in my nature, but neither was standing by while someone hurt a man who'd already given everything to his country, who'd already lost his wife to cancer, who'd already survived wars. I couldn't imagine only to die alone on his kitchen floor while strangers stole his memories. The predator with the empty hands took a step toward me. Just one step, testing, calculating. He was maybe 50 yards away now, close enough that I could see the tattoo on his neck, the sneer forming on his lips. He thought I was bluffing, thought I was just a scared old woman making noise. Henry's voice whispered in my memory, "Never aim at something you're not willing to hit, Ellie, and never let them see you shake." I lowered the rifle, aimed it directly at the man's chest. My hands stopped trembling. Something cold and clear settled over me, something that felt almost like the faith I'd lost, that bone-deep certainty that I was exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what needed to be done. "I spent 30 years married to a man who taught me how to shoot," I said, and every word came out like ice. "He's dead now, so I don't have much left to lose. But you've got your whole life ahead of you. Question is whether you want to spend it running away or bleeding out in my neighbor's driveway. Your choice. You've got 5 seconds." I started counting, out loud, like I was talking to a child who wouldn't listen. 1. The man with the laptop dropped it. The sound of it cracking against the gravel seemed louder than my gunshot. 2. The one with the pillowcase let it fall. Money scattered across Tom's porch bills, catching the wind, floating away into the darkness like prayers no one would answer. 3. The predator raised his hands, slowly. His eyes never left mine. I could see the calculation happening behind them, weighing his chances, measuring the distance, wondering if an old woman really had the nerve to pull that trigger. 4. They ran, all three of them, scrambling toward a dark pickup truck I hadn't noticed before, parked just beyond Tom's driveway with its lights off. Doors slammed, the engine roared to life, tires spun on gravel, and then they were gone, disappearing down the mountain road in a cloud of dust and cowardice. The silence that followed was deafening. I stood there on my porch, still aiming at nothing, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. My whole body started shaking, then not from cold, but from the realization of what I'd just done, what I'd been willing to do. The rifle suddenly felt impossibly heavy, and I had to lower it before I dropped it. That's when I remembered Tom. I dropped the rifle on the porch and ran, barefoot across the cold ground, through the stretch of forest between our homes, over roots and rocks that cut my feet but didn't slow me down. I burst through his broken front door, glass crunching under my feet, and found him exactly where I'd seen him fall. He was conscious, barely. His eyes were open, staring at the ceiling, one hand still pressed against his chest. His face was the color of ash. Blood trickled from a cut above his eyebrow where one of them must have hit him. Tom. I dropped to my knees beside him, my hands hovering over his body, not sure where to touch, how to help. Tom, can you hear me? Talk to me. His eyes found mine. For a moment, they didn't focus. Then recognition sparked, followed by something that might have been confusion or gratitude or both. Eleanor. His voice was barely a whisper, rough as gravel. Did you just ... Don't talk? I said, even though I desperately needed him to keep talking. Needed to know he was okay. I'm calling for help. Just stay with me. But when I reached for my phone, I realized I didn't have it. I'd run out of my house with nothing but a rifle and Henry's jacket. My phone was back on the kitchen counter, next to the spilled tea, next to my ordinary life that had suddenly become something else entirely. Tom's hand found mine. His grip was weak, but it was there, real, alive. My phone, he managed, gesturing weakly toward the kitchen counter. Call, ... Call my son. Numbers under ... David. I found his phone, cracked screen but still working, and my fingers fumbled with it as I dialed 911. While I waited for them to answer, I knelt beside Tom again, and that's when I saw the medication bottles scattered across the floor where the burglars had knocked them over. Heart medication, blood thinners, prescriptions with dates from just last week. He'd been sick, really sick, and I hadn't known, hadn't asked. We'd lived next to each other for 6 years, two widowed souls, separated by maybe 100 feet and a lifetime of grief, and I'd never once asked him how he was really doing. The dispatcher's voice crackled through the phone, asking questions I answered on autopilot while I held Tom's hand and watched his chest rise and fall, each breath a small miracle. They're coming, I told him, squeezing his hand. Ambulance is on the way. You're going to be fine. He tried to smile. It came out crooked, broken. You saved my life, Eleanor. You with Henry's rifle, ... Double quotes. Hearing him say my husband's name broke something open inside me. Tears started falling before I could stop them, hot against my cold cheeks. I didn't know if I could do it, I whispered. I didn't know if I remembered how. It's been so long since you believed in anything. Tom finished, his voice gaining a little strength. His eyes held mine with an intensity that made me feel seen for the first time in years. Yeah, me too. And in that moment, kneeling on his kitchen floor surrounded by broken glass and scattered medication, and the wreckage of what could have been his death, something shifted. The walls we'd both built, the careful distance we'd maintained, the polite waves that never became real. Conversations, all of it crumbled like dust. In the distance, I could hear sirens. Help was coming. But what I didn't know yet, what I couldn't possibly have known as I held a dying man's hand and felt something warm bloom in the frozen wasteland of my chest, was that this was just the beginning. Some rescues save more than one life. The echo of that gunshot rolled through the mountains like thunder, bouncing off the pines and coming back to me again and again, as if the earth itself was aching. awake from a long sleep. For a moment, everything froze. The shadows in Tom's cabin stopped moving. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then chaos erupted. The three men burst through Tom's front door like rats fleeing a sinking ship, stumbling over each other in their panic. I could see their faces, no young, maybe mid-30s, hard faces that had seen too much and cared too little. One of them was carrying a pillowcase stuffed with what I assumed was Tom's life savings. Another had a laptop clutched under his arm. The third was empty-handed but moved like a predator, his eyes scanning the darkness, searching for the source of that shot. He found me. Our eyes locked across the distance, across the cold November night, and I saw something flicker in his face. Surprise, maybe. Confusion. Here I was, an old woman, in a nightgown, barefoot on a porch, holding a rifle that was almost as tall as I was. I must have looked like a ghost, or a grandmother who'd finally lost her mind. "Get off his property," I heard myself say, and my voice came out stronger than I felt, carried on the same wind that had carried Henry's voice through these mountains when he was alive. "Get out of here before I put the next one through something that bleeds." I don't know where those words came from. I'd never threatened another human being in my entire life. I'd taught Sunday school for 20 years before Henry died. I'd baked cookies for every church fundraiser, volunteered at the Veterans Hospital, donated to every charity that knocked on my door. Violence wasn't in my nature, but neither was standing by while someone hurt a man who'd already given everything to his country, who'd already lost his wife to cancer, who'd already survived wars I couldn't imagine, only to die alone on his kitchen floor while strangers stole his memories. The predator with the empty hands took a step toward me. Just one step, testing, calculating. He was maybe 50 yards away now, close enough that I could see the tattoo on his neck, the sneer forming on his lips. He thought I was bluffing, thought I was just a scared old woman making noise. Henry's voice whispered in my memory, "Never aim at something you're not willing to hit, Ellie, and never let them see you shake." I lowered the rifle, aimed it directly at the man's chest. My hands stopped trembling. Something cold and clear settled over me, something that felt almost like the faith I'd lost, that bone-deep certainty that I was exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what needed to be done. "I spent 30 years married to a man who taught me how to shoot," I said, and every word came out like ice. "He's dead now, so I don't have much left to lose. But you've got your whole life ahead of you. Question is whether you want to spend it running away or bleeding out in my neighbor's driveway. Your choice. You've got 5 seconds." I started counting, out loud, like I was talking to a child who wouldn't listen. 1. The man with the laptop dropped it. The sound of it cracking against the gravel seemed louder than my gunshot. 2. The one with the pillowcase let it fall. Money scattered across Tom's porch, bills catching the wind, floating away into the darkness like prayers no one would answer. 3. The predator raised his hands, slowly. His eyes never left mine. I could see the calculation happening behind them, weighing his chances, measuring the distance, wondering if an old woman really had the nerve to pull that trigger. 4. They ran, all 3 of them, scrambling toward a dark pickup truck I hadn't noticed before, parked just beyond Tom's driveway with its lights off. Doors slammed, the engine roared to life, tires spun on gravel, and then they were gone, disappearing down the mountain road in a cloud of dust and cowardice. The silence that followed was deafening. I stood there on my porch, still aiming at nothing, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. Whole body started shaking, then not from cold, but from the realization of what I'd just done, what I'd been willing to do. The rifle suddenly felt impossibly heavy, and I had to lower it before I dropped it. That's when I remembered Tom. I dropped the rifle on the porch and ran, barefoot across the cold ground, through the stretch of forest between our homes, over roots and rocks that cut my feet but didn't slow me down. I burst through his broken front door, glass crunching under my feet, and found him exactly where I'd seen him fall. He was conscious, barely. His eyes were open, staring at the ceiling, one hand still pressed against his chest. His face was the color of ash. Blood trickled from a cut above his eyebrow where one of them must have hit him. "Tom," I dropped to my knees beside him, my hands hovering over his body, not sure where to touch, how to help. "Tom, can you hear me? Talk to me." His eyes found mine. For a moment, they didn't focus. Then recognition sparked, followed by something that might have been confusion or gratitude or both. "Eleanor." His voice was barely a whisper, rough as gravel. Did you just ... Don't talk, I said, even though I desperately needed him to keep talking, needed to know he was okay. I'm calling for help. Just stay with me. But when I reached for my phone, I realized I didn't have it. I'd run out of my house with nothing but a rifle and Henry's jacket. My phone was back on the kitchen counter, next to the spilled tea, next to my ordinary life that had suddenly become something else entirely. Tom's hand found mine. His grip was weak, but it was there, real, alive. My phone, he managed, gesturing weakly toward the kitchen counter. Call my son. Numbers under ... David. I found his phone, cracked screen but still working, and my fingers fumbled with it as I dialed 911. While I waited for them to answer, I knelt beside Tom again, and that's when I saw the medication bottles scattered across the floor where the burglars had knocked them over. Heart medication, blood thinners, prescriptions with dates from just last week. He'd been sick, really sick, and I hadn't known, hadn't asked. We'd lived next to each other for 6 years, two widowed souls, separated by maybe 100 feet and a lifetime of grief, and I'd never once asked him how he was really doing. The dispatcher's voice crackled through the phone, asking questions I answered on autopilot while I held Tom's hand and watched his chest rise and fall, each breath a small miracle. They're coming, I told him, squeezing his hand. Ambulance is on the way. You're going to be fine. He tried to smile. It came out crooked, broken. You saved my life, Eleanor. You, with Henry's rifle, ... double quotes. Hearing him say my husband's name broke something open inside me. Tears started falling before I could stop them, hot against my cold cheeks. I didn't know if I could do it, I whispered. I didn't know if I remembered. How, it's been so long since you believed in anything. Tom finished, his voice gaining a little strength. His eyes held mine with an intensity that made me feel seen for the first time in years. Yeah, me too. And in that moment, kneeling on his kitchen floor surrounded by broken glass and scattered medication and the wreckage of what could have been his death, something shifted. The walls we'd both built, the careful distance we'd maintained, the polite waves that never became real conversations, all of it crumbled like dust. In the distance, I could hear sirens. Help was coming. But what I didn't know yet, what I couldn't possibly have known as I held a dying man's hand and felt something warm bloom in the frozen wasteland of my chest, was that this was just the beginning. Some rescues save more than one life. O bloco 2 está finalizado. Deseja que eu continue pro bloco 3, tentar novamente PC mínimo 4.000 e máximo de 7.000 caracteres, roteiro narrativo título. Burglars broke into veteran's cabin. Lonely widow fired old rifle saved him. Found faith and loved. Bloco 3, the ambulance arrived 23 minutes later, though it felt like hours. I stayed with Tom the entire time, holding his hand, talking to him about nothing and everything. The weather, the mountains, the way the stars looked different in November than they did in summer. Anything to keep him conscious, to keep him tethered to this world. The paramedics were young, efficient, kind. They worked quickly, checking his vitals, asking questions I answered as best I could while Tom drifted in and out of focus. His blood pressure was dangerously low, his heart rate erratic. They mentioned words like cardiac event and possible arrhythmia, medical terms that sounded like death sentences wrapped in professional calm. Are you family? One of them asked me as they lifted Tom onto the stretcher. I opened my mouth to say no, to explain that I was just a neighbor, barely even a friend. Someone who'd waved from across the driveway for 6 years without ever really seeing him, but Tom's hand tightened around mine. She's family, he said, his voice weak but certain. She's all I've got right now. The paramedic nodded, didn't question it. Then you'll want to ride with us, ma'am. We're taking him to Valley Medical Center. I looked down at myself, nightgown, bare feet cut and bleeding from my run through the forest. Henry's oversized jacket hanging off my shoulders like a shroud. I must have looked like I'd escaped from somewhere, like I was the one who needed saving. I need to get dressed, I started to say, but Tom's grip tightened again. Please, he whispered, don't leave me alone. And just like that, I was climbing into the back of an ambulance wearing my dead husband's jacket and my dignity somewhere. Back on my porch with that rifle, the doors slammed shut, the sirens wailed, and we were flying through the mountain darkness, toward a hospital. that held too many memories of the last time I'd made this same journey, 6 years ago, when Henry's hand went cold in mine and God's silence became permanent. Tom kept looking at me during that ride, his eyes searching mine like he was trying to memorize my face, like he thought he might not get another chance. The paramedic worked over him, adjusting IVs, monitoring screens that beeped and flashed with rhythms I didn't understand, but I understood the fear in Tom's eyes. I'd seen it before, in another man, in another ambulance that hadn't driven fast enough. "Tell me something," Tom said suddenly, his voice cutting through the mechanical sounds and the siren's scream. "Tell me about Henry." The request caught me off guard. In 6 years of being neighbors, we'd never talked about our dead spouses. It was an unspoken rule, a boundary neither of us had dared to cross. Grief was private, sacred, too raw to share with someone who might understand it too well. But here, in the back of this ambulance racing toward an unknown ending, the old rules didn't seem to matter anymore. "He was good," I said, and my voice cracked on the word. "The kind of good that makes you believe in things, in people, in God, even when nothing makes sense." I paused, wiping my eyes with the sleeve of his jacket. "He taught me how to shoot, how to be brave, how to stand up when everything in you wants to fall down." Tom smiled, just barely. "Sounds like he taught you well. He tried to teach me about faith too," I continued, the words pouring out now like water from a broken dam. "Real faith, the kind that doesn't disappear when prayers go unanswered." But I failed that lesson. When he died, when I prayed and begged and God just didn't show up, I stopped believing in anything except loneliness. "I know that feeling," Tom whispered. "Sarah died 3 years ago, cancer. I watched her disappear piece by piece, day by day, until there was nothing left but a body that used to be my wife. I prayed too, every single night, and every single morning. She was worse." His words hung in the air between us, heavy with the shared understanding that only people who've loved and lost can truly know. The ambulance hit a bump, and the equipment rattled, but neither of us looked away from each other. "I stopped going to church," Tom continued, "stopped talking to God. What was the point? He'd already made his position clear. We were on our own." "That's exactly what I thought," I said. "For 6 years, that's what I believed. But tonight," Tom said, his eyes holding mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. "Tonight you prayed. I heard you. Through the broken window, while they were standing over me, I heard you praying on your porch before you fired that shot." I stared at him, stunned. I'd thought those words were private, whispered too quietly for anyone but an absent God to hear, but Tom had heard them. In his moment of greatest need, my doubt-filled prayer had somehow reached him. "I didn't think it would matter," I admitted. "I didn't think anyone was listening." "Someone was," Tom said simply. "You're here. I'm still breathing. That's not coincidence, Eleanor. That's not luck." The ambulance pulled into the hospital's emergency bay, and suddenly everything became motion and noise again. Doors flew open. Medical staff appeared like actors in a play I'd seen before. They wheeled Tom away through automatic doors that swallowed him whole, and I was left, standing in the fluorescent brightness of the emergency entrance, barefoot and bleeding and more awake than I'd been in 6 years. A nurse approached me, young woman with kind eyes and a clipboard. "Ma'am, you're bleeding. Let me get someone to look at those feet." I looked down. My feet were covered in cuts, dirt, blood. I hadn't noticed, hadn't felt anything except the need to stay with Tom, to not let him face the darkness alone the way Henry had to. They put me in a treatment room, cleaned my wounds, wrapped my feet in gauze that felt too clean and white against the chaos of the night. A deputy sheriff came to take my statement, middle-aged man with tired eyes who wrote down everything I said about the burglars, the gunshot, the rescue. He didn't ask why I was wearing a nightgown. Maybe he'd seen stranger things. Maybe tragedy had its own dress code. "You did the right thing, ma'am," he said when he finished writing. "Brave thing. Most people would have just called and hoped for the best. Hope hasn't worked out too well for me," I said before I could stop myself. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw recognition in his eyes. He knew. Maybe he'd lost someone too. Maybe everyone in this hospital was just a collection of broken people, trying to save each other from the darkness they'd all fallen into. Hours passed. I sat in the waiting room in my nightgown and Henry's jacket, surrounded by other people's emergencies, other people's prayers. The coffee from the vending machine tasted like regret. The plastic chairs were designed to prevent comfort. Time moved like it does in hospitals, both too fast and too slow, measured in heartbeats and held breaths, and the terrible wait for news that could change everything. Finally, a doctor appeared, young, exhausted, but smiling. That smile told me everything before he even spoke. "He's stable," the doctor said. "He had a cardiac event. His heart went into an irregular rhythm from the stress and the assault, but we got it under control. He's going to need surgery, probably a pacemaker, but he's going to make it. Thanks to you getting help when you did." The relief hit me like a physical force. My knees went weak. I sat down hard in the plastic chair and realized I was crying, really crying, for the first time since Henry's funeral. Crying for Tom, crying for myself, crying for all the years I'd spent alone in that cabin, convinced that caring about anyone ever again was just an invitation for more. Heartbreak. "Can I see him?" I asked, when I could breathe again. "He's been asking for you," the doctor said. "Room 217. But just for a few minutes. He needs rest." I found Tom in a private room, connected to machines that beeped with reassuring regularity. His color, better now, almost human again. His eyes opened when I walked in, and that broken smile returned to his face. "You stayed," he said. He said, like he couldn't quite believe it. "Where else would I go?" I replied, surprising myself with the truth of it. "Home, back to your life, away from this mess." He gestured weakly at the hospital room, at himself, at the whole complicated situation we'd stumbled into. I pulled a chair close to his bed and sat down, my bandaged feet throbbing now that the adrenaline was wearing off. My life was just me and a ghost and a whole lot of silence. This mess is the most alive I felt in 6 years. Tom reached for my hand. I gave it to him without hesitation this time. "They're going to keep me here for a while," he said. "Surgery scheduled for day after tomorrow, and after that, I don't know, recovery, physical therapy, learning how to live with a heart that needs mechanical help to keep beating. You won't be alone," I said, and the words came out like a vow, like a promise I wasn't sure I knew how to keep but was going to try anyway. "Eleanor," he said softly, "why did you really come out tonight? Why did you risk everything for someone you barely know?" I thought about that question, about the real answer beneath the obvious one, about the prayer I'd whispered that I didn't think mattered, about the 6 years of silence I'd been drowning in. "Because maybe," I said slowly, "maybe I was tired of being the one who needed saving. Maybe I needed to remember that I could still do something that mattered, that I wasn't just waiting around to die in that cabin surrounded by memories of someone who's gone." Tom squeezed my hand. Or maybe God was listening after all. And maybe he knew we both needed to be saved. I left the hospital at dawn, when the sky was turning that particular shade of gray that exists between night and morning, between ending and beginning. A nurse called me a taxi, and I rode home in silence, watching the mountains emerge from darkness like they were being created fresh, like this was the first morning of the world instead of just another Sunday in November. My cabin looked different when I walked up the driveway. Smaller, maybe, or maybe I was different, bigger, braver, changed in ways I didn't fully understand yet. Tom's cabin stood next to mine with its broken window and open front door, a crime scene waiting for daylight and official investigation. The deputy had told me they'd secure it, collect evidence, try to find the men who'd done this, but I wasn't thinking about those men anymore. I was thinking about Tom's question, "Why did you really come out tonight?" Inside my home, everything was exactly as I'd left it. Spilled tea dried on the hardwood floor, the lamp still burning in the window. Henry's gun cabinet standing open like a mouth mid-sentence. But the silence felt different now, less oppressive, less permanent. Like maybe it was just waiting for something to fill it instead of being the only thing that would ever exist here again. I cleaned up the tea, put Henry's rifle back in its case, but this time I didn't lock the cabinet. Didn't hang the key back on its dusty nail. Something told me I might need it again. Not for violence. I prayed I'd never have to aim at another human being as long as I lived, but as a reminder that I was still capable of protecting things, of standing up, of being more than just a ghost haunting my own life. I showered, finally, washed the night off my skin, watched the dirt and blood swirl down the drain. My feet throbbed in their bandages. My whole body ached like I'd aged another decade in a single night. But underneath the pain, there was something else, something that felt almost like purpose. I should have slept, should have collapsed into bed and surrendered to exhaustion. But sleep felt impossible. So I made coffee instead and sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Henry and I had shared 30 years of breakfast, and I did something I hadn't done in 6 years. I prayed. Not the desperate, angry prayers I'd screamed at God when Henry was dying. Not the bitter, accusatory questions I'd hurled at heaven during those first terrible months of grief. This was different, quieter, more like a conversation than a confrontation. I don't know if you're listening, I said out loud to the empty kitchen. I don't know if you care, but if you do, thank you. For letting me get there in time, for giving me the strength to pull that trigger, for keeping Tom alive. And if this is you trying to tell me something, if this is you answering 6 years of silence, I'm listening now. I'm ready to listen. The coffee maker gurgled its response. Morning light crept through the window. Nothing miraculous happened. No voice from heaven, no burning bush or choir of angels, just silence. But it was a different kind of silence now, warmer, somehow, less like abandonment and more like patience. My phone rang, startling me out of my meditation. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. Mrs. Bradford, a man's voice, deep and hesitant. This is David Mitchell, Tom's son. The hospital gave me your number. I hope that's okay. Of course, I said, my heart suddenly racing. Is Tom all right? Did something happen? No, he's stable. I'm actually calling because double quotes. He paused, and I could hear emotion thickening his voice, because I wanted to thank you. The doctor told me what you did, how you saved my father's life. I'm driving up from Portland right now. I should be there by this afternoon, but I needed to call you first. I needed to tell you that that I don't know how to thank someone for giving me back my father. I sat down heavily in my chair, unprepared for the weight of his gratitude. You don't need to thank me. I did what anyone would do. But you're not just anyone, David said firmly. According to my dad, you're the woman who faced down 3 armed men in your nightgown with a rifle you hadn't fired in years. You're the woman who prayed for a man you barely knew. You're the woman who stayed with him all night in the hospital when you could have just gone home. That's not what just anyone would do, Mrs. Bradford. That's extraordinary. I didn't feel extraordinary. I felt like someone who'd been sleepwalking through life and had finally woken up because someone else needed saving more than I needed to keep hiding. Your father's a good man, I said quietly. He deserves to have more time, to see more sunrises, to know that people still care. He's been alone for so long, David said, and now the guilt was clear in his voice. After Mom died, he pushed everyone away, me included. I've tried to stay in touch, but he never wants to talk about anything real. Never admits he needs help, never asks for anything. I didn't even know he was having heart problems until the doctor told me this morning. I understood that kind of pride, that kind of isolation. I'd been living it myself for 6 years. Maybe, I said carefully, maybe he just needed to learn that asking for help doesn't make you weak, that letting people in doesn't mean you're betraying the person you lost. David was quiet for a long moment. Then, is that something you've learned, Mrs. Bradford, or something you're still learning? His question hit me like a revelation, because he was right. I was still learning, still figuring out how to be alive again instead of just existing, still discovering that opening your heart after it's been shattered isn't weakness, it's the bravest thing a person can do. I'm learning, I admitted. Your father's teaching me. Then maybe, David said softly, maybe you're saving each other. After we hung up, I sat with those words for a long time. Saving each other. It sounded so simple, so obvious, but I'd spent 6 years believing that salvation was something that came from above, or not at all. That healing was a gift God either gave you or withheld, that you either got your miracle or you learned to live without one. But what if salvation wasn't a lightning bolt from heaven? What if it was just 2 broken people deciding to be less broken together? What if miracles were just moments when you chose connection over isolation, hope over despair, love over fear? I spent the rest of that Sunday cleaning both cabins. The sheriff's department had finished processing Tom's place as a crime scene. So I swept up the broken glass, organized the scattered medication bottles, picked up the money that had spilled across his porch and put it in a coffee can on his kitchen counter. I found photographs knocked over during the burglars, and a beautiful woman who must have been Sarah, young and smiling and alive. Tom in military uniform, so young he looked like a different person entirely. Tom and David, fishing together, back when his son was just a boy and the world still made sense. I set the photographs back up carefully, tenderly, like they were precious relics, because they were. They were proof that Tom had loved and been loved, that his life had mattered long before last night, that he was more than just a victim in a crime report. In my own cabin, I did something I'd been avoiding for 6 years. I opened the boxes in the attic, the ones filled with Henry's things, the ones I'd packed away after the funeral because looking at them hurt too much. His clothes, his books, his journals filled with thoughts about faith and love and the way mountains hold on to light even after the sun goes down. I read those journals for hours, sitting on the attic floor surrounded by dust and memory. Henry's handwriting was still familiar, still dear. His words were still wise, still kind, still full of the faith I'd lost when I lost him. One entry stopped me cold. It was dated 3 months before he died, before he even knew his heart was failing, before our last days together became a countdown neither of us could see. Eleanor worries that if something happens to me, she'll fall apart. He'd written, she doesn't see her own strength, doesn't realize that the courage she thinks comes from me has been inside her all along. I pray that if I leave this world before her, she'll discover what I've always known, that she's capable of extraordinary love, extraordinary bravery, extraordinary faith. I pray she won't spend her remaining years hiding from life just because I'm not there to live it with her. I pray she remember that love doesn't end when hearts stop beating. It transforms. It becomes something bigger than two people. It becomes a way of being in the world. I cried reading those words. Cried for all the years I'd wasted proving Henry wrong, hiding in this cabin, refusing to transform my grief into anything except more grief. He'd known me so well, known exactly what I'd do, and he'd written these words anyway, maybe hoping that someday I'd find them and remember who I used to be before loss redefined me. That afternoon, I drove back to the hospital, brought Tom some real clothes, some books, some of the homemade soup I'd made from vegetables in my garden. David was there, sitting beside his father's bed, holding a conversation that looked both awkward and necessary to men, trying to bridge years of careful distance with words that didn't come easily. When I walked in, both of them looked at me like I was exactly who they'd been waiting for. Eleanor, Tom said, his face brightening despite the hospital pallor and the wires connecting him to machines. You came back? Of course I came back, I said, setting down the soup and the bag of clothes. Someone's got to make sure you're behaving yourself. David stood up, and I finally saw him clearly, tall, maybe 50 years old, with his father's eyes and his mother's gentle smile. He crossed the room and pulled me into a hug that surprised us both. Thank you, he whispered against my hair. Thank you for loving my father when I was too far away to do it myself. And that's when I understood. That's when the final piece clicked into place. I hadn't just saved Tom's life that night. I'd saved my own. Because love, real, brave, transformative love, doesn't just rescue the dying. It resurrects the dead. It brings people back to life who thought they'd never live again. Tom's surgery happened 2 days later, on a Tuesday morning when the hospital smelled like disinfectant and fear, and the kind of hope that comes with sharp instruments and skilled hands. David and I sat together in the surgical waiting room for 4 hours, not talking much, just existing in that liminal space where time stops meaning anything and every minute feels like proof that you're still capable of caring whether someone lives or dies. When the surgeon finally emerged, still wearing his blue scrubs and that expression doctors practice in medical school, the one that reveals nothing until they're ready, I realized I was holding my breath. David's hand found mine without either of us deciding it should. The procedure went well, the surgeon said, and the relief that flooded through me was so intense it felt like drowning in reverse. We've implanted the pacemaker. His heart should maintain a steady rhythm now. He'll need to take it easy for a few weeks. No heavy lifting, no driving initially, but he should make a full recovery. Should. That word hung in the air like a prayer with conditions attached. Nothing was guaranteed. Nothing ever was. But should was better than the alternative. Should was enough to build a future on, even if that future was uncertain. David went in first to see his father. I waited, giving them time alone. Time to say whatever fathers and sons say when they've almost lost each other. Through the small window in the recovery room door, I could see them: Tom, pale and tired but alive, and David, bent over his father's bed, his shoulders shaking with what I assumed were tears he'd been holding back for 3 years, maybe longer. When David finally came out, his eyes were red but clear. Clearer than they'd been since I'd met him. "He wants to see you," David said. "Actually, he's insisting on it. Says he won't rest until you come in." Tom looked smaller in that hospital bed, diminished somehow by the vulnerability of surgery and the honest truth that his body had betrayed him. That mortality wasn't just a concept anymore, but a lived experience measured in heartbeats regulated by a machine. But when he saw me, that crooked smile returned. "They tell me I have to behave myself now," he said, his voice rough from the breathing tube they'd removed an hour earlier. No excitement, no stress. "Basically, I'm supposed to become the most boring version of myself possible." "Sounds terrible," I said, pulling a chair close to his bed. "Guess you'll need someone to keep you company through all that boredom." "Funny you should mention that." Tom shifted slightly, wincing with the movement. "I've been thinking a lot about what happens when I leave here. David wants me to move to Portland, live with him and his family. Says I shouldn't be alone anymore." Something cold settled in my chest. Of course David would want that. Of course Tom should be with family, with people who loved him, not isolated in a mountain cabin next to a widow who'd only just remembered how to be human again. "That makes sense," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You'd be safer there, closer to doctors, to people." "That's what David said." Tom's eyes held mine. "But here's the thing, Eleanor. I've spent 3 years being safe, being careful, keeping everyone at a distance so I wouldn't have to feel anything too deeply, wouldn't have to risk loving someone and losing them again. And you know what? All that safety got me. It got me almost dead on my kitchen floor, while strangers stole my life savings." He paused, catching his breath. The heart monitor beeped its steady rhythm, the rhythm the pacemaker was now controlling, the rhythm that was keeping him alive. "Then you showed up in your nightgown with a rifle," he continued. "And you reminded me that being alive means taking risks, means caring about people even when it's terrifying, means having faith even when you've got every reason not to." "Tom, let me finish." His hand found mine, stronger now than it had been that night on his kitchen floor. "I told David I'm not moving to Portland. I'm going home, to my cabin, to the mountains, to the place where Sarah and I built our life together. But I also told him I won't be alone, because I have a neighbor, a friend, someone who might be willing to check on me occasionally, share a cup of coffee, maybe even teach me how to pray again." My throat tightened. "I'm not sure I'm qualified to teach anyone about prayer. I'm still figuring it out myself." "Then we'll figure it out together," Tom said simply. "Eleanor, I know this is fast. I know we barely know each other. But sometimes God doesn't give you decades to decide whether to trust someone. Sometimes he gives you one night, one moment, one gunshot that changes everything. And you have to be brave enough to see it for what it is." "What is it?" I whispered. "A second chance," Tom said. "For both of us." I sat there, holding his hand, feeling the weight of possibility pressing against all my careful defenses. 6 years I'd spent alone. 6 years of talking to ghosts and avoiding anything that looked like hope. And now this man, this near stranger who'd almost died in front of me, was offering me something I thought I'd never have again: connection, purpose, a reason to wake up that wasn't just habit. "I'm scared," I admitted. "Me too," Tom said. "My heart literally can't handle stress anymore. I'm the worst possible candidate for emotional risk. But I'm more scared of going back to that cabin and spending whatever time I have left just existing instead of living." David appeared in the doorway then, holding 2 cups of coffee from the cafeteria. He looked at Usat, his father, and this woman his father had decided mattered, and I saw something like understanding cross his face. "Dad told me about his decision," David said, handing me one of the coffees. "About staying in the mountains. I won't pretend I love the idea, but I also know I can't force him to live my version of safety. So, I have a proposition for both of you." He pulled up a chair, creating a small circle of 3 people who, 48 hours ago, had been strangers living separate lives in separate kinds of grief. "I want to renovate Dad's cabin," David said. "Put in a security system, better locks, maybe even a panic button connected directly to the sheriff's office. I want to make it safer so I can sleep at night knowing he's protected. But more than that, I want to build a pathway. A real one, with lights and a railing. Something that connects your two properties, Eleanor. So you're not just neighbors. So you're something more, David. Tom started, but his son cut him off. I'm not asking you to make any promises, David said, looking at me now with an intensity that reminded me of his father. I'm not assuming anything about what this is or what it might become. I'm just saying that life is too short and too uncertain to let pride or fear or propriety keep people apart who clearly need each other. So what do you say, Eleanor? Can we build you a bridge? I thought about Henry's journal entry, about transformation, about love becoming bigger than two people, becoming a way of being in the world. I thought about that prayer I'd whispered on my porch, the one I didn't think anyone was hearing, the one that had somehow changed everything. Yes, I said, and the word felt like stepping off a cliff and discovering you could fly. Build the bridge. Tom squeezed my hand. David smiled, really smiled, for the first time since I'd met him. And somewhere in the machinery keeping Tom's heart beating, in the fluorescent lights humming overhead, in the ordinary miracle of three broken people deciding to be less broken together, I felt something I hadn't felt in 6 years. I felt God smiling back. If this story is touching your heart, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to remember that it's never too late for second chances. Drop a comment below telling me about a time when a stranger became family. Read every single one. Tom came home on a Friday afternoon when the mountains were painted in shades of gold and rust, when autumn was surrendering to winter but hadn't quite let go yet. David drove him up the winding road while I waited on my porch. Nervous in a way I hadn't been since I was a teenager waiting for Henry to pick me up for our first real date. I'd spent the week preparing, cleaning Tom's cabin more thoroughly than I'd cleaned anything in years, stocking his refrigerator with meals I'd cooked, soups and casseroles, and the kind of comfort food that feels like someone caring about whether you eat or not. I'd even planted mums along his walkway, bright yellow flowers that looked like small suns pushing back against the approaching cold. When Tom stepped out of David's truck, moving carefully, one hand pressed against his chest where the pacemaker lived beneath his skin, our eyes met across the distance between our properties. That distance that had felt like miles for 6 years suddenly felt like nothing at all. "Welcome home," I called out, and he smiled, that crooked smile that was becoming familiar, becoming dear. "It's good to be here," he said. "Though I have to admit, the place looks better than when I left it. The cleaning fairy's visit while I was gone." "Something like that," I said, walking toward him, meeting him halfway between our homes. The ground between us felt significant somehow, like contested territory that was finally becoming shared space. David was already unloading bags from the truck, medications, medical equipment, instructions from doctors who specialized in keeping damaged hearts beating. He looked exhausted, running on coffee and worry, and the particular kind of relief that comes when the crisis is over but the fear hasn't quite left your body yet. "I'm staying through the weekend," David told us as he carried bags into Tom's cabin, "just to make sure Dad's settled. After that, I need to get back to Portland. Work, family, life." I heard the guilt in his voice, the same guilt I'd heard on the phone, the weight of being too far away, of having a life somewhere else while your parent needs you here. "He won't be alone," I said quietly, and David's shoulders relaxed, just slightly. That evening, the three of us sat on Tom's porch as the sun disappeared behind the mountains and the temperature dropped toward freezing. David had built a fire in the outdoor pit, and we wrapped ourselves in blankets and drank hot cider and talked about everything except the fear that was living in all of us, the fear that Tom's heart might stop again, that the pacemaker might fail, that death was just waiting for another opportunity. Instead, we talked about Sarah, about Henry, about the people we'd loved and lost, and how strange it was that grief could exist alongside joy, that you could miss someone desperately and still find reasons to laugh. "Mom would have liked you," David said to me as the fire crackled and sparked. "She always said Dad needed someone who wouldn't let him get away with his stubborn nonsense, someone who'd call him out when he was being ridiculous." "Was she that person?" I asked. "She was exactly that person," Tom said softly, his voice thick with memory. "She'd stand there with her hands on her hips and tell me I was being an idiot, and somehow it sounded like 'I love you.' I miss that. Miss having someone who cared enough to be honest. Henry was like that too, I said. He had this way of telling uncomfortable truths that made you grateful instead of defensive, like he was offering you a gift instead of criticism. David poked at the fire, sending embers spiraling into the darkness. Do you know what I think? I think they'd both be glad. You found each other. I think they'd want this, whatever this is becoming. Whatever this is becoming. The phrase hung in the cold air like a question none of us were quite ready to answer. Because what was this? A friendship born from trauma? To lonely people clinging to each other because the alternative was drowning in isolation? Or something deeper, something that felt almost like the early stages of love but seemed too fast, too unlikely, too much like a miracle to trust completely. Think, Tom said carefully, that Sarah would tell me to stop overthinking. She always said I analyzed everything to death instead of just letting myself feel things. And Henry would tell me to stop being so afraid, I added. He used to say that faith wasn't about knowing what happens next, it was about trusting that you'd be okay regardless. Sounds like they were both pretty smart, David said, smiling slightly. That night, after David went to bed in Tom's guest room, Tom and I stayed on the porch. The fire had burned down to glowing coals, but neither of us wanted to go inside yet. The darkness felt comfortable now instead of threatening. The silence felt full instead of empty. Can I tell you something? Tom said eventually. Something I haven't told anyone, not even David, of course. When I was lying on that floor, when those men were standing over me and I thought I was dying, I wasn't thinking about my life flashing before my eyes or any of that cliché stuff. I was thinking about regret, about all the years I'd wasted being alone because I was too scared to let anyone matter again, about how I'd survived a war and cancer, taking my wife in all kinds of hell, only to die alone in my own kitchen because I was too proud to admit I needed people. He paused, pulling his blanket tighter against the cold. Then, I heard your voice, he continued. Through the broken window, I heard you praying, and I realized I wasn't alone. That even in what I thought was my last moment, there was someone who cared enough to stand between me and death. Someone I'd been too blind to really see for 6 years. Tom, let me finish, he said gently. I'm not good at this, at saying what I feel. Sarah used to get so frustrated with me because I'd bottle everything up and expect her to just know what was going on inside my head. But I'm trying to be different now. Trying to be the kind of man who says things out loud before it's too late. My heart was racing. The pacemaker in Tom's chest was keeping his heart steady, but mine was wild, untethered, terrified and hopeful in equal measure. Eleanor, I know we barely know each other. I know this is fast and strange and probably inadvisable for a man who just had heart surgery, but I also know that life is short and uncertain and full of moments that slip away if you don't grab them. So here's what I want to say. I want to know you, really know you. I want to hear about your life with Henry, about your daughter who doesn't call enough, about what you dream about at 3 a.m. when you can't sleep. I want to share meals and conversations and all those ordinary moments that add up to something extraordinary if you're with the right person. He took a breath, steadying himself. I'm not asking for promises. I'm not asking you to fall in love with me or commit to some fairy tale ending. I'm just asking if you'll walk across that pathway David's going to build and have coffee with me tomorrow morning, and maybe the morning after that, and maybe we'll see where it goes from there. The coals in the fire pit glowed like small hearts still beating in the darkness. Behind us, through Tom's window, I could see David moving around inside, probably checking on his father's medications, probably worrying the way children worry about parents who've suddenly become fragile. I thought about Henry's journal, about transformation, about how love doesn't end when hearts stop beating, just becomes something else, something bigger, a way of being in the world. Tom, I said quietly, I need to tell you something too, something I haven't said out loud to anyone. I'm listening. I'm terrified, I admitted, terrified that if I let myself care about you, if I let this become real, I'll lose you too, that God will take you away just like he took Henry, and I'll be back in that cabin talking to ghosts and wondering why I was foolish enough to believe in second chances. Tom reached across the space between our chairs and found my hand. His grip was warm, solid, alive. I can't promise I won't die, he said. I can't promise this pacemaker will work forever, or that my heart won't give out someday. None of us can promise that. But I can promise that whatever time I have, whether it's 5 years or 50, I don't want to spend it alone. I don't want to spend it safe. I want to spend it living. Even if living hurts, I whispered. Especially if living hurts, Tom said. Because hurt means you still care, means you're still human, means you haven't given up on the possibility that joy exists somewhere beyond the grief, above us. Stars were appearing in the clear November sky, thousands of them, maybe millions. Ancient light traveling across impossible distances just to reach our eyes. Each one a small miracle of persistence, of light refusing to surrender to darkness. Okay, I said finally. Coffee tomorrow morning. At my place. 7 o'clock. It's a date. Tom said, and squeezed my hand once before letting go. I walked back to my cabin alone, but the loneliness that had defined the journey for 6 years was gone. In its place was something fragile and terrifying and absolutely worth protecting. Something that felt suspiciously like hope. Inside my home, I sat at the kitchen table where Henry and I had shared 30 years of ordinary mornings, and I did something I never thought I'd do. I said a prayer of gratitude, not for changing the past, not for bringing Henry back, but for showing me that endings aren't always final, that sometimes grace arrives wearing a nightgown and carrying a rifle, that sometimes salvation looks like a pathway being built between two broken people who decided they'd rather be broken together than whole alone. The pathway David built took 3 weeks to complete. He hired a local contractor, came up every weekend with tools and determination, and slowly transformed the wild stretch of forest between our cabins into something that looked almost intentional. Solar lights lined the edges. A wooden railing provided support for unsteady steps. Smooth stones replaced the roots and rocks that had cut my feet that first night. But long before the pathway was finished, Tom and I had already found our way to each other. That first coffee at 7 in the morning turned into breakfast. Breakfast turned into lunch. Lunch turned into evenings on one porch or the other, talking until the stars came out and the cold drove us inside. We talked about everything: our marriages, our regrets, our children who'd grown up and moved away, our bodies that were betraying us in small and large ways, our faith that had crumbled and was now tentatively rebuilding itself brick by uncertain brick. Tom told me about Vietnam, about the things he'd seen that still woke him up at night 40 years later, about the friends he'd lost and the guilt that came with surviving when better men hadn't, about how Sarah had been the only person who could calm the nightmares, who could bring him back from the darkness with just her voice, her touch, her stubborn refusal to let him disappear into his trauma. I told him about the daughter I rarely saw, about Karen, who lived in Seattle with a husband I'd never met, and grandchildren I knew only from photographs she occasionally texted, about how, after Henry died, Karen had tried to convince me to sell the cabin and move to a retirement community where I'd be safe and supervised, and slowly suffocating under the weight of other people's good intentions. "Why didn't you?" Tom asked one afternoon, as we sat in my kitchen, watching snow begin to fall outside the window. "Because this cabin is where Henry and I were happy," I said. "This is where we built our life." Moving felt like admitting he was really gone, like I was erasing him. But staying meant living with his ghost. Yes, I admitted. But at least the ghost was familiar. At least I knew how to be lonely here. Tom reached across the table and covered my hand with his. We'd been touching more lately, small gestures that felt enormous. Fingers brushing while passing a coffee cup, shoulders bumping while sitting on the porch, hands finding each other in the darkness without deciding to. "You're not lonely anymore," he said quietly. "No," I agreed. "I'm not." The sheriff's department caught 2 of the 3 men who'd broken into Tom's cabin. They found them trying to rob another veteran's home 2 counties over, still using the same truck, still preying on people they thought were too old or too weak to fight back. The 3rd man was never found, but somehow that felt right. Sometimes evil doesn't get its full punishment. Sometimes justice is incomplete. Sometimes you have to be satisfied with surviving instead of winning. Tom had to testify at the trial in early December. I went with him, sat in the courtroom gallery, watched him face the men who'd almost killed him. His voice was steady as he described that night: the breaking glass, the fists, the darkness, the certainty that he was going to die alone. When the defense attorney tried to imply that Tom had provoked the attack, that his military training somehow made him a threat, I saw something flash in Tom's eyes that reminded me why he'd survived a war, when so many others hadn't. I was 74 years old, recovering from a heart condition, and unarmed. Tom said evenly, "If you think that makes me dangerous, then maybe you should reconsider your definition of threat." The two men were sentenced to 8 years each. Not enough, maybe, but enough to give Tom some closure. Enough to prove that what happened to him mattered, that he mattered, that society still believed in protecting its veterans even when they were old and vulnerable and living in isolated cabins on mountain roads nobody cared about. After the trial, we drove home in silence. Snow was falling harder now, accumulating on the roads, making everything clean and white and new. Tom stared out the window, his jaw tight, his hands clenched in his lap. "Talk to me," I said finally. "I keep thinking about what would have happened if you hadn't been there," he said, his voice barely audible. "If you hadn't heard the glass break, if you hadn't come out with that rifle, if you'd just called 911 and waited for help, that would have arrived too late. But I was there," I said firmly. "And you're here. That's what matters, is it?" Tom turned to look at me, and his eyes were wet. "Eleanor, do you believe in divine intervention? In the idea that God orchestrates moments, puts people in specific places at specific times for specific purposes?" I thought about that question. About Henry's journal entry that I'd found the same day Tom came home from the hospital. About the prayer I'd whispered that I didn't think mattered. About 6 years of silence that ended with a gunshot. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I used to believe in that kind of God, the one who controls everything, who has a plan, who moves people around like pieces on a chessboard. But then Henry died despite all my prayers, and that God stopped making sense. So what do you believe now?" I pulled the car over to the side of the road. We were close to home, maybe 5 minutes away, but this conversation felt too important to have while driving. Snow accumulated on the windshield while we sat in the warm car, creating our own small world, separate from everything else. "I think maybe God doesn't control everything," I said slowly, working through the theology as I spoke it. "Maybe he just creates possibilities, opens doors, puts people within reach of each other, and hopes they'll be brave enough to reach back." You and I lived next to each other for 6 years, Tom. 6 years of waving across driveways and never really connecting. God didn't force me out of my cabin that night. He didn't make those men break in. He didn't guarantee any or a particular outcome. Then what did he do? "I think he whispered," I said. "I think he suggested." And for the first time in 6 years, I was finally desperate enough, or lonely enough, or just human enough to listen. Tom was quiet for a long moment. Then he unbuckled his seatbelt, leaned across the console, and kissed me. It was gentle, tentative, the kind of kiss that asks permission, even as it's happening. His lips were warm against mine, tasting like coffee and courage, and the willingness to risk heartbreak one more time. When he pulled back, we were both shaking. "I'm sorry," he said immediately. "I should have asked, I shouldn't have just." I kissed him back, longer this time, deeper, with 6 years of loneliness pouring into it. 6 years of talking to ghosts, and avoiding mirrors, and wondering if I'd ever feel anything again. When we finally broke apart, we were both crying and laughing, and completely terrified. "I loved Sarah," Tom said, his forehead resting against mine. "Will always love her. She was my whole world for 42 years. "I know," I whispered. "And I loved Henry, still love him, always will. But maybe," Tom said carefully, "maybe love isn't a limited resource. Maybe hearts don't have to choose. Maybe they just expand to hold more." I thought about the pacemaker in his chest, that small machine keeping his heart beating at the right rhythm. About how sometimes our bodies need help to do what they were designed to do. About how maybe the physical and metaphorical kind sometimes need assistance to keep loving when everything in us says it's safer to stop. "Take me home," I said. "Your cabin or mine. Does it matter anymore?" Tom smiled, really smiled, and it was the most beautiful thing I'd seen since Henry's last smile before he closed his eyes in that hospital bed. "No," he said. "I don't think it does." We drove the last 5 minutes home as snow continued to fall. The pathway David had built was already covered in white, the solar lights glowing softly beneath the accumulation. Later, we'd shovel it. Later, we'd make sure it was safe to walk between our homes. But right now, in this moment, the snow made everything look like a blank page, like possibility, like starting over without erasing what came before. That night, we sat in my living room, the room where Henry's ghost had lived for 6 years, and Tom held my hand while we watched the fire burn. We didn't make promises about the future. Didn't talk about where this was going or what we'd call it or how to explain it to our children who might not understand. We just existed together, two people who'd survived impossible things and decided that survival wasn't enough anymore. Living, that's what we were choosing. Messy, complicated, terrifying living. And somewhere in heaven, or wherever love goes when people die, I liked to think that Henry and Sarah were watching, not jealous, not betrayed, just grateful that the people they'd loved hadn't given up, that we'd found our way back to faith and hope and the radical courage it takes to open your heart after it's been shattered. The fire crackled. Tom's thumb traced circles on my palm. Outside, the snow kept falling, covering everything in grace. Spring came to the mountains the way it always does, slowly, reluctantly, like someone waking from a dream they're not quite ready to leave. The snow melted into streams that carved new paths through the forest. The trees budded with that particular green that only exists in new beginnings. And Tom and I emerged from winter different than we'd entered it. We'd become something I didn't have words for. Not quite dating, that term felt too young, too casual for what we were building. Not married, neither of us was ready for that kind of declaration, that kind of replacement of what we'd had before. We were just us. Two people learning how to share space and silence and the ordinary miracles of waking up knowing someone cared whether you made it through the night. Tom's daughter-in-law had a name for it. She called it companionship with depth when she and David visited in March. I called it survival. Tom called it grace. Maybe we were all right. The pathway between our cabins was worn now from constant use. Some mornings I'd wake in my own bed and make coffee in my own kitchen. Other mornings I'd wake in Tom's guest room. We maintained separate bedrooms, maintained that boundary because we both needed to know we were here by choice. Not desperation, or loneliness, or fear of being alone. We were choosing each other daily, hourly, in small decisions that added up to something that felt almost like healing. Karen finally called in April, first time in 7 months. I was planting tomatoes in the garden. Tom and I had started together when my phone rang with her number. And for a moment I considered not answering, considered protecting this new life I'd built from her judgment, her concern, her inability to understand that sometimes getting older means getting braver, not more careful. But I answered. "Mom," she said, and her voice sounded strange, thick. "Mom, I heard about what happened, about the break-in, about you and a rifle, and why didn't you call me?" "Because you had your own life to live," I said simply. "Because I handled it. You could have died. I didn't." There was a long pause. In the background, I could hear my grandchildren voices I barely recognized, growing up without me, becoming people I'd never really know. "David Mitchell called me," Karen said finally. "Tom's son. He thought I should know. He told me what you did, how you saved his father's life." "David shouldn't have done that." "Why not?" "Mom, you're 72 years old. You faced down armed burglars. You've been spending time with his father. A lot of time." I could hear the question she wasn't asking, the concern, the fear that her mother was making foolish choices, was being taken advantage of, was too old and too lonely to see clearly. "His name is Tom," I said, keeping my voice steady. "And yes, we spend time together. He's a good man, a kind man, someone who understands loss and faith and how hard it is to keep living when the person you built your life around is gone. Are you in love with him?" The question hung between us like something breakable. I looked across the garden to where Tom was building a trellis for the beans we'd plant next week. His movements were careful, measured. The pacemaker had given him his life back, but it had also given him limitations, reminders that his body was fragile now. That time was a gift instead of a guarantee. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "What I feel for Tom isn't what I felt for your father. It's quieter, more careful. Less about passion and more about presence. But yes, Karen, I care about him deeply. And if that turns into Lviv, it hasn't already, then I'm not going to apologize for it or hide it or pretend I'm too old to feel things." Karen was crying now. I could hear it in her breathing. "I'm sorry, Mom," she whispered. "I'm sorry I haven't been there. I'm sorry I tried to make you move after Dad died. I'm sorry I didn't understand that you needed to grieve in your own way, in your own time. I thought I was protecting you, but I was just trying to control how you healed because watching you hurt was too painful." Something loosened in my chest. some old resentment I'd been carrying without realizing it. You were grieving too, I said gently. You lost your father. I don't blame you for handling it the only way you knew how. Can I come visit? Karen asked. Can I meet Tom? Can I see this life you've built? I want to know you again, Mom, the real you. Not the version of you I've been imagining sad and alone and waiting to die. I want to know the woman who fires rifles and plants gardens and refuses to give up on living. Yes, I said, and felt tears on my own cheeks now. Yes, come visit, come meet Tom, come see what grace looks like when you finally stop running from it. We talked for another hour, about her kids, her marriage, her job, about all the ordinary details of life that add up to connection when you share them instead of hoarding them. When we finally hung up, Tom was standing beside me, holding 2 glasses of lemonade, his face questioning. That was Karen, I said, taking one of the glasses. My daughter. She's coming to visit next month. Are you okay with that? I'm terrified, I admitted, but yes, I'm okay with it. More than okay. Tom sat beside me on the garden bench we'd found at a yard sale, painted together, positioned between our 2 properties like a physical manifestation of the middle ground we'd created. You know what I was thinking about today, Tom said, looking out at the mountains that had witnessed all of this, our isolation, our rescue, our tentative journey toward something neither of us had expected. I was thinking about that night, about how I was lying on that floor convinced I was dying alone, and then I heard you praying. I've been trying to figure out what that moment meant. What changed in me when I realized someone cared enough to risk everything for a neighbor they barely knew? What did you figure out? That maybe faith isn't about believing God will give you what you want, Tom said slowly. Maybe it's about trusting that He'll give you what you need, even when you don't recognize it. I didn't need to survive that night. I needed to learn how to live again. And He sent me you, a woman with a rifle and a broken heart, and enough courage to remember that love is always worth the risk. I leaned my head against his shoulder. His arm came around me, steady and sure. You saved me too, I whispered. You gave me a reason to stop talking to ghosts, to start believing that endings don't have to be final, that there's life after loss if you're brave enough to reach for it. We sat there as the sun moved across the sky, as shadows lengthened and birds sang and the world kept turning the way it always does, indifferent to individual heartbreak and healing. But we weren't indifferent. We were present, alive, choosing each other in the full knowledge that we could lose each other tomorrow, that hearts stop beating, that nothing is guaranteed except the moment we're living right now. That night, we did something we'd been avoiding. We went to church, the little white chapel, 5 miles down the mountain road, the one with the faded paint and the bell that rang every Sunday morning, the one I'd stopped attending 6 years ago when God stopped making sense. We sat in the back pew, holding hands like teenagers, feeling out of place and perfectly right at the same time. The pastor was new young earnest, with a sermon about resurrection that made me think maybe he understood something about death and rising that most people miss. Resurrection isn't just about coming back to life, he said. From the pulpit, it's about transformation, about becoming something new while honoring what you were before. It's about carrying your scars and your memories and your grief into a future that looks nothing like your past but is, somehow, still holy. Tom squeezed my hand. I squeezed back. After the service, people approached us, neighbors I'd been avoiding for years. Folks who'd known Henry, who'd brought casseroles after the funeral and then slowly stopped calling when I made it clear I wanted to be left alone. They welcomed us back, welcomed us together. If they were surprised to see the widow Bradford and the veteran Mitchell sitting together, sharing a hymnal, they didn't say so. Maybe small towns understand that sometimes the best response to loss is just letting people find their way back to living however they can. We drove home as the sun set behind the mountains, painting everything in shades of gold and promise. The pathway between our cabins waited, lit by those solar lights. David had installed a bridge between 2 lives that were slowly becoming one life without erasing the lives that came before. I don't know what happens next, Tom said as we stood at the place where the pathway met both our porches. The exact spot where choice happened every day. I don't know if my heart will keep working, if we'll have years together or just months, if love is what we're building or something else entirely. Neither do I said. But I know I want to find out, Tom said. With you. Whatever comes next, Eleanor, I want to face it with you. I thought about that rifle still sitting in Henry's gun cabinet, about the woman who'd been too afraid to fire it until someone needed saving, about how courage isn't the absence of fire, it's choosing love despite the certainty of loss. Then let's find out together, I said. And there, on that pathway between past and future, between grief and grace, between two cabins that held two lifetimes of memories and were now creating new ones, Tom Mitchell kissed me like we had all the time in the world. Maybe we did, maybe we didn't, but we had this moment, this choice, this beautiful, terrifying, perfectly imperfect now. And for two people who'd survived the unspeakable, who'd learned that faith sometimes arrives wearing a nightgown and carrying a rifle, that was more than enough. It was everything.